Hello. Today I'm going to be reviewing Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. A long while ago, I reviewed the first part of this book trilogy, Shadow and Bone, and this is the sequel to that book. If you want to see my review of the first book in the series, I will link it in the description of this video. To quickly summarise what happened in that book, essentially we have the main character Alina, who was discovered to be the Sun Summoner, which is basically someone who has like magical powers that allows them to create like light and summon light, really powerful light. And she's like the only person with these abilities. And these abilities are very important because it's the only way to combat the Volcra. They're like flying monsters that live in the Unsea, and the Unsea is this like vast darkness or whatever that consumes the land. It splits the country of Ravka down the middle. Essentially, Alina went to this magic school that teaches all the people with magic, who are called Grisha, and she like learns about her magic for a bit before eventually being told that the guy who's in charge of them all, the Darkling, is actually evil. So then she runs away and she ends up getting captured. She has this like collar put on her, which acts as a magic amplifier, and the Darkling tries to use it to control her, but then she breaks free and runs away at the end of the book. So that's the general gist of the first book. So this book kicks off with Alina and her lover Mal in hiding across the ocean in this other country. But very quickly they're found by the Darkling. So the Darkling captures Alina and Mal, and he puts them on a ship, which is commanded by this privateer named Stormhund. I don't know. Something along those lines. But the Darkling doesn't take them back to Ravka immediately. Instead, he goes out looking for this magical creature, which he wants Alina to kill so she can turn it into a second amplifier. Because that first amplifier was made from like a special magical deer or whatever. The second one is like a sea monster. So then they end up finding the beast, and then there's a big battle because Stormhund betrays the Darkling, and they all end up fighting his forces, and they take Alina and they all flee to Ravka. So Alina ends up killing the sea creature or whatever and gets a second amplifier, but she also learns about a third amplifier, which you get by killing this firebird. They go back to Ravka. Stormhund is revealed to actually be one of the princes of Ravka, the second son, Nikolai. He's able to convince the king to allow Alina to take over the Grisha as leader. And then most of the book is then planning for the Darkling's eventual return to Ravka and the fight that will ensue. As well as that, Alina has some sort of personal struggles, and there's lots of tension between her and Mal. And then eventually this all culminates in a final battle, which I won't give away any details for. But yeah, so that's the general gist of the story. So one of my biggest criticisms about the first book was to do with Alina. See, in the first book, she felt like a very passive character. She didn't really make any decisions. Most of the things that she did because she was told to, and she was often like sort of led around, or it didn't seem like she had much agency until like right at the end when she broke free of the Darkling's influence. However, in this book, she does have a bit more agency and is not as passive, so there's a definite improvement. There is still a lot of her like listening to what other people say and doing what other people say, but she also has to sort of take charge a bit more in this book because she's put in charge of all the Grisha. So she's sort of put into that leadership role. There's also a lot of like internal struggles that she has to deal with. There's a lot of tension between her and Mal. They end up like growing a bit distant and sort of fighting a bit due to a few different reasons. So one of the things in this book is that Alina really struggles with her morality. There's a few times throughout the book where she does things that she sort of thinks are not very good, and she sort of feels bad for, not being, I guess, 100% good. And also, now that she has two amplifiers, she can sort of like feel like her magic calling for more power and all that. So there seems to be a bit of the corrupting power of power going on. Although I wouldn't say that there's anything she does in the book that's especially egregious, but there is that internal struggle. And the Darkling is very much linked with that internal struggle. Throughout most of the book, she sees the Darkling like appear every now and then, and she's like not sure if it's real, if it's a hallucination, or what's going on. She finds herself sort of drawn to him in a sense, and this seems pretty linked to her like questioning of her morals and all that. So there continues to be that sort of like romantic undertones between Alina and the Darkling's relationship, and he definitely seems to represent like the worsts of her. And then of course there's Nikolai or Stormhund. There's also a bit of like romantic subtext going on with those two. But I mean, Mal sort of seems like the right choice, I think. I haven't read the third book yet. I'm imagining that she'll probably still be with Mal. But shifting over to the new character, Nikolai, or Stormhund, he kind of steals the show a little bit. He's definitely the most important new character introduced in this book, and he features in quite a lot of chapters. His role in the story is really big. He is the one who rescues Alina and gets her back to Ravka. And then once he reveals himself to be Nikolai, one of the Ravkan princes, he takes Alina back to the capital of Os Alta and gives her lots of like tips and advice on how to like be a good leader and how to make like people follow you and all that kind of stuff. And overall, he continues to work quite closely with Alina in like planning and preparations and all that. And yeah, as I mentioned, there's definitely some like romantic undertones and stuff going on. He seems to sort of fall into that like the one true heir trope. He's second in line, but he seems a much better fit for ruling than his older brother. I imagine that it's something that's going to get explored a bit more in the next book as well. This book does sort of seem to drag out a bit in the middle and towards the end as well. Once our characters are back in Ravka, most of the book is basically them preparing, planning, and just getting ready for when the Darkling returns. And overall, a lot of the stuff that happens during this part of the story, a lot of it doesn't have much of an effect on the ending. Like, there's definitely some stuff they set up which is important, but there's also a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to really go anywhere. That said, there are a lot of interesting sort of politics and dynamics that are brought up and explored throughout this part of the story. Like learning about what's happened between the first and the second book, such as how the Darkling attempted to perform a coup and take over Ravka, but he failed. And the Grisha are sort of left really scattered and split up because some of them have sided with the Darkling and then some of them have sided against him. And then there's also the Apparat, who is this like priest or whatever, who's been going on about how Alina is a saint, which is like a huge deal because like the royals hate saints or something. So the suggestion that Alina could be a saint is sort of dangerous because it could give the royals a reason to kill her or something. But the Apparat is also on the run, like, and people are sort of wondering about his allegiances because he had worked with the Darkling in the past, but it was unclear if he still was or if he was on a different team. But all of the stuff that the Apparat's been going on about has clearly had an effect because there is a lot of people who do believe Alina is a saint. There's like heaps and heaps of like people, mostly like peasants and soldiers and a bit like lower born people who are like dedicated to her or whatever. And then there's all the like sort of internal stuff going on with Nikolai and his brother, because Nikolai like knows the threat that the Darkling poses and is like serious about wanting to stop him. But his brother Vasily and most of like the Ravkan military leadership and all that, they don't really see him as that big of a threat, or they don't really fully understand and comprehend that he's not a normal enemy, which kind of hampers a lot of the planning and preparation going on. Overall, the monarchy is depicted to be very ineffective, because I feel like a lot of the fantasy stories I've read, not that I've read that many, they depict it as good or evil. I wouldn't say the Ravkan monarchy is good or evil, I'd just say it's incompetent, really, and is probably not going to survive the changing times. Although that said, I could see the next book potentially having Nikolai take over. So maybe he'll fulfill that sort of one true heir trope, be an actual good ruler. But I don't know, that's just speculation. As I said, I haven't read that book, so we'll see what happens. So there are a lot of interesting things that are explored, and then of course, as I mentioned, there's a lot of like internal struggles for Alina to deal with. So the book's good for that. It's just the plot side of things is a bit slow and not much happens. And as for the ending, without giving anything away, I want to say it was reasonably good and sets up the next book with some higher stakes. However, the ending also seems to just sort of come out of nowhere. But yeah, overall, to give my final thoughts on Siege and Storm, I'd say it's a lot better than the first book. It's a lot more interesting, and like the characters are more interesting, the sort of plot's more interesting, all of the dynamics, the politics, the different like groups and stuff involved in the story. Alina is a lot more of an interesting character in this book. Like her struggles are more entertaining, and she actually feels more like a character this time around. That said, I'm still not hugely invested in the series. Like, I think it's good. It just hasn't quite reached that level of greatness yet. But if you liked the first book, I would recommend it. And the next book I'll be reading is the third and final book in this trilogy, Ruin and Rising. I do look forward to seeing how they're going to conclude things. And we'll see if some of my predictions are right. So yeah, I will be reading Ruin and Rising next. So that review will be coming out at some stage. And yeah, with any luck, it will be yet another improvement. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what that book holds. Anyway, that's it for my review. I hope you found this helpful and entertaining, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.